I gathered everyone for a family dinner to discuss my will. The moment Brixton flashed me that smile, I should known something was off. At our usual family get-togethers, she always kept this tight-lipped, polite but distant look. Tonight, though, her grin was so genuine it bordered on ecstatic. It sent a nervous flutter straight to my stomach. In the 8 years she'd been married to my son, Colin, I'd never seen her look at me that way. Like she was actually, truly thrilled to see me. The dining room felt different too. This traditional Connecticut home is where my late husband and I spent 30 years together. The mahogany table I inherited from my mother gleamed under the crystal chandelier, set with my finest bone china. The stuff I usually only bring out for Thanksgiving or Christmas. Right in the center, fresh white roses from my backyard mixed their sweet scent with the rich aroma of the prime rib I'd spent all afternoon roasting. Everything looked too perfect, like a stage setup and waiting for a massive drama to unfold. Norma, you look absolutely radiant tonight, Brixton gushed, leaning in to plant a kiss on my cheek. A wave of her heavy, cloying perfume hit me. She was wearing a brand new burgundy dress, beautifully tailored and clearly from Saks Fifth Avenue, probably costing more than my monthly grocery budget. Her blonde hair was styled in perfect loose waves and her makeup was flawless, looking like she'd stepped right off the cover of a high-end lifestyle magazine. Colin walked in behind her. As a partner at an architecture firm, he'd recently taken on a massive commercial project and looked absolutely exhausted. At 36, he still had his father's gentle brown eyes and that habit of running a hand through his hair when stressed. He gave me a quick, distracted hug. "Thanks for having us, Mom. You know how much I appreciate you doing this." But what really caught my attention was my 12-year-old grandson, Tommy. He hovered in the shadows of the hallway, his deep, dark eyes darting between his parents and me with a seriousness way beyond his years. He clutched his sketchbook tightly to his chest. He was always drawing, always watching. His tense posture immediately set off my grandmotherly instincts. "Tommy, sweetie, come give Grandma a hug," I said, opening my arms. He walked over slowly, and when he wrapped his thin arms around me, I could feel him trembling. "Hi, Grandma," he whispered, barely audible. "Are you feeling okay, buddy?" I asked, stepping back to look at his pale face. "He's just tired," Brixton cut in quickly, placing a possessive hand on his shoulder. "He had soccer practice after school, didn't you, sweetie?" Tommy nodded, but when his eyes met mine for a brief second, I caught something that made my breath catch. It was fear. My grandson was terrified, and I had absolutely no idea why. "Well, let's sit down before the food gets cold," I said, forcing my voice to sound cheerful. The grandfather clock in the corner chimed 7. Usually, that familiar sound brought comfort, but tonight it felt strangely ominous. Colin pulled out Brixton's chair with an exaggerated chivalry. He'd been doing that a lot lately, as if trying too hard to prove he was a great husband. She sat down gracefully, that strange smile never leaving her face as she surveyed the table. "Everything looks gorgeous, Norma," she said, her voice dripping with sweetness. "You really outdid yourself, and I love what you've done with your hair. The silver looks so elegant and distinguished." I instinctively touched my hair. 6 months ago I'd stopped coloring it, deciding to embrace the silver at 63. Brixton had made several passive-aggressive remarks about it before, saying I was letting myself go. So tonight, the compliment felt as empty as a politician's promise. Thank you, I replied carefully, taking my seat at the head of the table. Tommy sat on my right, still clutching his sketchbook, while Colin and Brixton sat opposite us. As I began carving the roast beef, Brixton started bragging about her shopping trip downtown. She'd bought new drapes for their living room, spent $300 on a throw pillow she claimed was absolutely essential, and had her nails done at her usual expensive salon. She talked about spending what amounted to my monthly living expenses with such casual indifference that my hand tightened around the carving knife. And then I stopped by that little jewelry boutique on 5th, she continued, her eyes sparkling. They had this stunning diamond necklace in the window. It was listed for $15,000, but honestly, it's worth every penny. The craftsmanship was unbelievable. I paused. $15,000. That was more than half of my annual pension as a retired teacher. That's quite expensive, I managed to say. Oh, but Norma, you appreciate quality jewelry more than anyone, Brixton said, her eyes landing on my simple pearl earrings. After all, you have that gorgeous diamond necklace your mother left you. With the current market, it's probably worth about the same. You really should wear it more. A chill settled in my stomach. I rarely talked about my mother's necklace, which was locked in my jewelry box upstairs. How did Brixton even know its estimated value? I'd never had it appraised around her, let alone worn it in her presence. It was far too precious, tied to the memory of my mother's gentle hands, clasping it around my neck when I was young. How do you know what it's worth? I asked, keeping my tone casual. Brixton's smile flickered. Oh, Colin mentioned it once. Didn't you, honey? Colin looked up from his plate, confused. I don't remember talking about Mom's jewelry. An awkward silence fell over the table. I could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock and the soft clink of Tommy's fork pushing food around his plate. Something was incredibly off. Speaking of belongings, Brixton broke the silence brightly, as if the awkward moment had never happened. Norma, I noticed you aren't using your usual bag tonight. The nice black leather one you always carry. I glanced toward the living room, where I'd left my everyday brown purse. I decided to use a nicer one tonight, I said. The black one is upstairs. Oh, you should definitely use the black one, Brixton insisted. It goes so much better with your outfit. Besides, didn't you say the compartments keep you so much more organized? The suggestion felt strangely pushy. I wondered why she cared so much about my purse. It's fine. This brown one works just as well. But, Norma, she pressed, wouldn't you feel more secure with the one you're used to? You always keep all your important things perfectly organized in there. Tommy's fork clattered against his plate, drawing everyone's attention. He looked incredibly pale, his hands shaking slightly. Can I be excused? He whispered. You've barely touched your food. Colin protested. I'm not very hungry. Nonsense, Brixton said, her voice sharp for the first time all evening. Eat your dinner. We're a family and family eats together. She emphasized the word family in a way that made my chest tighten. There was a cold, possessive edge to it. Tommy shrank back into his chair, but I noticed his worried eyes darting toward me. Actually, I said, standing up, I think I will go grab my other bag. Brixton is right. It really is more organized. Oh, wonderful, Brixton beamed. Let me help you find it. That's not necessary, I said quickly, but she was already up. I insist. Besides, I'd love to see your bedroom again. You redecorated since I was last up there, right? I hadn't touched a thing since my husband passed away 3 years ago. But I didn't correct her. Instead, I headed for the stairs, keenly aware of Brixton close behind me, her heels clicking sharply on the hardwood. My bedroom felt cramped with her in it. She walked around, touching things, and picked up a framed photo of my husband and me on our 25th anniversary. What a lovely photo, she murmured. You two were so happy. It must get so lonely living in this big house all by yourself. I found my black leather bag in the closet and turned to face her. I managed just fine. Oh, I'm sure you do. You're a strong, independent woman, Norma. But at your age, it might be better to have family looking out for you. Have you thought about downsizing? Moving somewhere smaller, easier to manage? The suggestion felt like a slap in the face. Move out of the home I'd shared with my husband for 3 decades? The home where Colin took his first steps. This is my home, Brixton. Of course it is, she replied quickly, though I caught a calculating look in her eyes. I just think maintaining a place this size must be exhausting and expensive. The property taxes alone can't be cheap. I gripped the strap of my bag tighter. I'm not ready to leave. No, of course not. Just a thought. She smiled again, but it didn't reach her eyes. Shall we head back down? The men will wonder where we went. As we walked back to the dining room, I felt like I was missing something crucial. A piece of a puzzle I didn't even know I was solving. Tommy was sitting exactly where we left him, frantically sketching, his pencil moving across the paper in rapid, nervous strokes. What are you drawing, sweetie? I asked as I sat down. He looked up, his eyes wide and serious. Nothing, he mumbled, quickly shutting the book. Tommy is quite the little artist, Brixton said, reaching across the table to ruffle his hair. He flinched away from her touch. Always drawing in that little book. Sometimes I wonder what goes on in that head of his, Brixton said, pulling her hand back casually. The rest of dinner passed in a blur of forced conversation and growing unease. Brixton kept steering the topic toward my house, my finances, and my future. She asked about my will, if I'd updated it recently, and what I planned to do with my mother's jewelry. Every question felt like a probe. Colin, oblivious as always, chatted about his latest architectural project. He seemed entirely blind to the undercurrent of tension, completely wrapped up in his own world of blueprints and building codes. As I served dessert, my mother's famous apple pie, Tommy suddenly stood up. Grandma, can I show you something in the kitchen? What is it, sweetie? Just something, he said urgently. Please. I followed him into the kitchen, leaving Colin and Brixton at the table. Tommy walked straight to the window, pretending to look out at the backyard while his parents' voices drifted faintly from the dining room. Tommy, what's wrong? I asked softly. You've been acting so strange all evening. He turned to face me, and I saw tears welling in his eyes. He opened his mouth to speak, closed it, and cast a nervous glance back toward the dining room. Then, He leaned in and whispered in a voice so quiet I could barely hear it. Grandma, Mom put your diamond necklace in your bag. She's going to call the police. The words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at my grandson's terrified face, my brain struggling to process what he'd just said. What? My necklace? His voice dropped even lower, trembling. Mom took it from your jewelry box while you were downstairs. She put it in your black leather bag. She's going to tell the police you took it. I heard her on the phone. My legs went weak, and I had to grip the marble countertop to steady myself. My own daughter-in-law was setting me up. The necklace I had treasured for 30 years, my mother's most precious possession, was being used as a weapon against me. Are you sure? I whispered back. Tommy nodded, tears finally spilling over. She said you're getting too old and confused to make decisions anymore. She said once you get in trouble with the law, Dad will have to take over everything. Every bizarre piece of the night suddenly fell into place with terrifying clarity. Brixton's strange behavior, her insistence on the black bag, her prying questions about my house and finances. She wasn't just trying to get me arrested. She was trying to make me look incompetent and mentally unfit. Under the law, if an elderly person living alone is shown to have severe cognitive issues and is involved in a legal incident, it becomes incredibly easy for immediate family to file for a conservatorship. Colin would step in. And Colin, kind and trusting to a fault, would believe whatever his wife told him. He would take over my finances, my decisions, my life. And Brixton would be the one pulling the strings. I looked down at my grandson's tear-stained face, and a fierce surge of protectiveness washed over me. This child had risked his mother's wrath to warn me, carrying this awful secret all night. Thank you for telling me, Tommy, I said softly, drawing him into a gentle hug. You are incredibly brave. What are we going to do, Grandma? I held him tight for a moment, my mind racing. Then, I pulled back and looked at him with newfound resolve. We're going to turn the tables, sweetie. Sometimes, letting someone think their trap is working is the best way to catch them. With trembling hands, I reached into the black leather bag, resting on the kitchen counter. Between my wallet and reading glasses, my fingers brushed against something cold and hard. There it was, my mother's diamond necklace. It felt incredibly heavy in my hand. Not from the weight of the diamonds, but because of what it represented. Betrayal. Calculated cruelty. A trap designed to strip away the independent life I'd built over 63 years. Tommy watched me with wide, serious eyes as I pulled it out. Even in the soft kitchen light, the diamonds caught the glare, casting tiny rainbows across the white cabinets. This heirloom had been in our family for 4 generations, passed down as a symbol of love. Now, it was being used to dismantle my life. How did you find out? I whispered to Tommy, keeping my voice low. I went to the hallway closet to get my drawing supplies. He whispered back, wiping his nose. I heard Mom on the phone in your bedroom. She was telling someone that this would solve everything. She said you'd finally be out of the picture. Out of the picture. The phrase felt like ice water in my veins. To Brixton, I wasn't family. I was an obstacle to be cleared away. I thought back to all her subtle remarks over the years, hinting that I was getting forgetful, suggesting I shouldn't live alone. She'd been building a case against my mental sharpness for a long time, saving up ammunition for this exact moment. Did she see you listening? I asked. No, I was really quiet. But Grandma, she said more. Tommy's voice cracked slightly. She said, once the police get involved, she'll make sure you go somewhere where you can't cause any more trouble. She said Dad would sign the papers because he'd think it was best for you. My blood ran cold. She wasn't just planning to get me in trouble. She wanted me committed to an assisted facility, stripping away my autonomy so she and Colin could take over my house and estate. And with my son's trusting nature, he would probably believe it was for Mom's own good. I wrapped an arm around Tommy's shoulders. This poor child had been carrying this terrifying burden, worrying about his grandmother's fate. You've been so brave, sweetheart, I murmured. But now, we have to be smart. From the dining room, Brixton's loud, artificial laugh echoed. She was probably waiting for a signal to set her plan in motion. The police wouldn't just show up. Someone had to call them. I looked at the necklace, then at my grandson's worried face. A plan took shape in my mind. It was risky, but if it worked, it would be a perfect countermove. If Brixton wanted to play games, she was about to find out what happens when you underestimate a retired schoolteacher who spent 30 years managing teenagers and understands psychologies inside and out. Tommy, I need you to go back to the table and act normal, I said calmly. Can you do that for me? He nodded, though his eyes were still full of worry. What are you going to do? Something your mother never expected. I gave him a reassuring smile. Trust me, okay? Once Tommy walked back, I stood alone in the kitchen for a moment to gather my courage. This familiar space felt different now, charged with a new sense of purpose. The blue ceramic tiles my husband laid 20 years ago. The white cabinets I painted myself. The window overlooking the roses we planted together. It all felt incredibly precious. This was my home. I wasn't going to let anyone take it from me without a fight. Holding the necklace, I slipped quietly into the hallway. Brixton's designer handbag was sitting on the console table by the door. Taking a deep breath, I slipped the diamond necklace into the very bottom of her bag. Then, I patted my cardigan pocket, making sure the spare keys and my actual necklace, the one I'd quietly retrieved from upstairs earlier, were safe. I smoothed down my clothes and walked back into the dining room, ready. As I sat back down, Brixton looked up, her smile so bright it could have powered the chandelier. There you are, she said. We were wondering where you two ran off to. Tommy was showing me his latest drawings, I replied smoothly. He's getting so talented. Oh, absolutely, Brixton agreed. Though her eyes immediately locked onto the black leather bag sitting by my chair. I could practically see the gears turning in her head, wondering if I'd noticed her little delivery. Colin was happily eating his second slice of pie, completely oblivious to the silent tension vibrating between the two women at the table. Mom, this pie is as good as ever. Seriously, you should open a bakery. Your father used to say the same thing, I replied. But my focus remained on Brixton. She kept checking her phone, her fingers tapping nervously on the table. Whatever she was waiting for, it was coming soon. You know, Norma, Brixton said suddenly. I've been thinking about what we discussed upstairs. About the house. Have you given any more thought to maybe getting some helper? Someone to assist you around here? There it was again. The subtle push to make me look incapable. I handle things just fine, thank you. Oh, I'm sure you do. But accidents happen, especially when people live alone at your age. Just last week, my friend Margaret's mother fell in her bathroom and was there for hours before anyone found her. It was incredibly dangerous. The implication was clear. I was a hazard to myself. A frail woman who couldn't be trusted to live independently. It was the perfect narrative to present to the authorities once they found stolen jewelry on me. A poor, confused, old woman who didn't know what she was doing. I'm very careful, I said evenly. Of course you are, but sometimes being careful isn't enough. Brixton's phone buzzed, and she glanced down quickly. A tiny, smug smile touched the corners of her lips. Sometimes we need others to look out for us. Tommy sat stiffly beside me, his fork hovering in the air. He knew something was about to happen. I reached over and gently patted his hand, offering what little comfort I could. Speaking of looking out, Colin said, setting his fork down. Brixton and I have been talking about having you over for dinner more often. Or even, having you stay with us, especially during the winter when the roads get bad. My heart sank. They'd been discussing my future behind my back, making plans for my life. How long had these conversations been going on? How many times has they sat in their modern home, deciding what to do with the older woman who stood between them and a comfortable inheritance? That's very sweet, I said, keeping my voice steady. But I'm perfectly comfortable in my own home. But Mom, Colin pressed, you're here all by yourself. What if something happens? What if you fall or get sick? And it takes hours for someone to find you. His voice was thick with genuine concern, which only made the whole thing more tragic. Brixton had clearly been whispering in his ear for months, maybe years, slowly planting doubts about my safety and health. She probably started small, dropping casual remarks about me getting forgetful or pointing out how isolated I was in this big house. My trusting son had absorbed every single hint, never realizing he was being programmed. Colin, I appreciate the concern, but I am perfectly capable of living independently. Are you, Norma? Brixton asked softly. Because lately you seem a bit spaced out. Remember last month when you called Colin 3 times about the exact same doctor's appointment? Or when you forgot you'd invited us over for dinner, and we showed up to an empty kitchen? I stared at her, stunned. Both of those things had happened, but not the way she was describing them. I had called Colin about the appointment because the clinic rescheduled it twice, and I needed to let him know since he'd offered to drive me. As for the dinner, Brixton herself had called to change the date, which briefly confused me about which Sunday we'd agreed on. But the way she spun it, I sounded like I was losing my mind. That's not what happened, I started. But Colin was already nodding, his face clouded with worry. She's right, Mom. I've been concerned too. I just didn't want to say anything. My heart broke. My own son, the boy I'd raised with so much love, was sitting there questioning my sanity based on a web of lies. Brixton had spent months building this narrative of my cognitive decline, setting the stage to justify whatever she planned to do next. I think we really should talk about getting some help around here. Colin continued gently. Maybe someone to check in during the day. Help manage your medications and appointments. Maybe even someone to stay overnight occasionally. A live-in caretaker, Brixton added eagerly. Someone trustworthy to keep an eye on things. The trap was fully visible now. Once they convinced everyone I needed supervision, it would be a short step to declaring me unfit and sending me to a facility. If I fought back, they'd just use my resistance as further proof of my cognitive decline. It was a perfect, inescapable loop. Suddenly, Brixton's phone buzzed again, and this time, she answered it. Hello? Yes, this is Brixton Whitfield. She listened for a moment, her face shifting dramatically into an expression of shock and concern. What? Are you sure? How is that even possible? Colin leaned forward. What's going on? It's the jewelry boutique on 5th, Brixton said, her voice trembling with a very convincing trace of panic. Someone called in an anonymous tip about a stolen necklace. They asked if I knew anything because apparently, the description matches a piece that was recently reported missing. My blood turned to ice, but I forced myself to remain completely still. This was it. The climax she'd been building toward all evening. What kind of necklace? I asked, keeping my voice entirely neutral. A diamond necklace, vintage setting, valued at around $15,000. Brixton's eyes locked onto mine, watching for the slightest hint of panic. They said the police might want to stop by to ask a few questions, just to rule us out. Well, that's incredibly strange, I said, reaching into my cardigan pocket. Because my mother's necklace is right here. I pulled the necklace out, letting it dangle from my fingers. The diamonds caught the light of the chandelier, glittering beautifully. Brixton's face went completely pale. Her carefully constructed plan was dissolving right in front of her. I was actually planning on wearing it tonight, I continued casually. But then I thought it was a bit too formal for a family dinner. How funny that someone would report a matching one stolen. A heavy, dead silence fell over the room. Colin looked utterly confused, his gaze shifting between his wife's pale face and my calm expression. Tommy stared at me with pure awe. He finally saw what his grandmother was capable of. But Brixton wasn't ready to give up. I could see her mind racing, desperate to salvage the situation. Well, it's wonderful that your necklace is safe, she said slowly. But the police might still want to ask some routine questions in the neighborhood. Of course, I agreed cheerfully. Though I hope they realize that filing a false police report is a serious crime. Wasting police resources is an easy way to end up in hot water. Through the dining room window, I could already see flashing lights reflecting in the distance. Red and blue, unmistakable. Brixton's backup plan was already in motion. There was no turning back now. And that was perfectly fine with me. The doorbell rang at exactly 9:15 p.m., cutting through the heavy silence. I glanced at the grandfather clock, noting how precise her timing had been. Brixton had calculated this down to the minute, likely giving the police a specific arrival window to ensure she caught me with the stolen goods. I'll get it, Colin said, starting to rise. No. Brixton interrupted quickly, her voice sharper than she intended. Let me. It's probably about the phone call. She smoothed her burgundy dress and marched toward the front door. This was supposed to be her moment of triumph, the culmination of months of planning. I could almost hear her rehearsing the performance in her head. The shocked, concerned daughter-in-law, heartbroken to discover her elderly mother-in-law had taken something that didn't belong to her. Under the table, Tommy gripped my hand. His fingers were cold and trembling. I squeezed back, trying to reassure him, even though my own heart was hammering against my ribs. Everything depended on the next few minutes. I heard the front door open, followed by deep, professional male voices. 2 officers, the standard dispatch for a theft report. Brixton's voice carried clearly back to the dining room, her performance flawless. Officers, thank you for getting here so quickly. I was the one who called. I'm just so worried about my mother-in-law. She's been acting very strangely lately. When I heard about the missing jewelry, her voice trailed off as she led them into the dining room. The lead officer was a middle-aged man with graying hair and kind eyes, the type who had handled countless domestic calls throughout his career. His younger partner looked fresh out of the academy, eager and alert. Good evening, the older officer said politely. I'm Sergeant Williams, and this is Officer Chen. We received a report regarding a missing item, specifically, a diamond necklace valued at around $15,000. Of course, I said, slowly standing up. Though I'm not sure how we can help. All of my jewelry is safe and sound. Brixton stepped forward, wearing a mask of deep sorrow. Officers, I hate to say this, but I think there might be a misunderstanding. You see, my mother-in-law has been having some memory issues lately. She gets confused, forgetful. We've been very worried about her. Colin shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearly between his wife's narrative and the reality of the situation. My mom lives alone in this big house, he added quietly. We have noticed some changes. What kind of changes? Sergeant Williams asked, pulling out a notepad. Well, Brixton said, her voice dripping with fake sadness. She misplaces things, forgets appointments. Last week, she called the same clinic 3 times for one visit. And she's been talking about financial troubles, which is strange, because we know her finances are completely stable. I listened to her lies, amazed by the sheer calculation. She was painting a picture of an unstable woman who might have taken something without even realizing it. It was incredibly clever, and if Tommy hadn't warned me, it would have worked perfectly. Mrs. Whitfield, Sergeant Williams said, addressing me directly. Do you mind if we ask you a few questions? Not at all, I replied calmly. Have you visited any jewelry boutiques recently? Specifically the one on 5th? I shook my head. I rarely go shopping for jewelry these days. Most of what I own has strictly sentimental value. Officer Chen scanned the room, taking in the expensive furniture, the crystal chandelier, and the obvious signs of a comfortable life. This is a very nice home, he noted. Have you lived here long? 30 years, I said. My husband and I bought it when Colin was just 6. And you live here alone now? Yes, since my husband passed 3 years ago. Brixton cleared her throat delicately. Officers, I hate to bring this up, but I think you should know that when we arrived tonight, My mother-in-law seemed very anxious. She kept fidgeting with her bag, acting very nervous. All eyes turned to my black leather bag sitting innocently by my chair. Brixton's face was a picture of regret, as if she were doing a painful but necessary duty for my own good. Mrs. Whitfield, Sergeant Williams said gently, "Do you mind if we take a look inside your bag? Just to rule out any connection to the report." I knew my rights. Under the Fourth Amendment, they needed my consent to search without a warrant. "Of course you can look," I said, reaching for the bag. "But I should mention that I specifically changed my bag tonight. I usually carry my brown one, but my daughter-in-law insisted I use this black one instead." I caught a flash of panic on Brixton's face. In her script, I was supposed to be a confused old woman who might have absent-mindedly taken something. She hadn't expected me to recall the details of changing my bag so clearly. I opened the bag and began placing my items on the table one by one. My wallet, reading glasses, a small pack of tissues, my house keys, and a grocery list I'd written that morning. Both officers watched patiently. "That's everything," I said, showing them the empty interior. Sergeant Williams frowned. "Mom, we received a report that you might be in possession of a diamond necklace tonight. Are you sure there's nothing else in there?" "Quite sure," I replied. "Though, I do own a diamond necklace. It belonged to my mother." I reached into my cardigan pocket, pulled out the necklace, and let it shine under the light. Both officers stepped closer to examine it, and I watched the color drain completely from Brixton's face. "This piece has been in our family for 4 generations," I continued. "It has never left this house, except for routine cleaning. May I ask when it was last valued?" Officer Chen asked. "About 5 years ago, for insurance purposes. It was valued at $15,000. The silence that followed was deafening. Brixton's carefully constructed story was crumbling, and I could see her desperately searching for a way out. "But," she said, her voice rising in panic, "that doesn't prove she didn't take another one. Maybe she hid it somewhere else." Sergeant Williams looked at Brixton with a new, sharper focus. "Mom, what exactly made you so certain Mrs. Whitfield had taken a necklace tonight?" Brixton stammered, realizing she'd overstepped. "I just assumed, given her recent state of mind, and when I heard about the missing item." "So you called the police based on an assumption?" the sergeant asked. "Not because you actually saw anything. I was worried." Brixton's voice cracked. "Is it a crime to care about my family, Tommy?" Who had been sitting quietly the entire evening, finally spoke up. His young voice was clear and steady. "Officers, can I tell you something?" Both officers looked at him in surprise. In domestic disputes, children rarely intervened. "What is it, son?" Sergeant Williams asked kindly. Tommy looked straight at his mother, pale but determined. "I heard my mom on the phone earlier. She said she was going to put Grandma's necklace in her bag and call the police." The words dropped like a stone into a still pond, sending shockwaves through the room. Colin's face went entirely white. The officers exchanged a look. Brixton looked as if she'd been struck. "Tommy," she said, her voice dangerously low. "You must have misunderstood what you heard." "I didn't," Tommy said, firmly. "You were in Grandma's bedroom. You said this would solve everything, and Grandma would finally be out of the picture." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Officer Chen took a step closer to Brixton, his friendly demeanor gone. "Mom, would you care to explain what's going on here?" "My son is confused," Brixton said, her words rushing together. "Kids misunderstand adult conversations all the time. I was talking about something completely different." "In that case, you wouldn't mind if we take a look at your belongings, would you?" Sergeant Williams asked coldly. For the first time all evening, Brixton's composure cracked. "This is ridiculous. I'm the one who called you. Why would I have any stolen jewelry?" "Just routine," the sergeant said smoothly. "If you have nothing to hide, it shouldn't be an issue." I watched Brixton's face cycle through panic, calculation, and desperation. She was trapped, and she knew it. But even cornered, she was dangerous. "Fine," she spat, her voice dripping with venom. "This is absurd. I try to help my family, and you treat me like a criminal." She marched to the hallway, grabbed her designer handbag from the table, and ripped open the zipper with theatrical anger. The officers watched as she pulled out her wallet, phone, keys, a makeup compact, and then, at the very bottom, something caught the light. A diamond necklace. An exact match to the one in my hand. Absolute silence fell over the room. Even the grandfather clock seemed to stop ticking. Officer Chen reached for the handcuffs on his belt. "Mom, I think we need to have a serious talk." Brixton stared at the necklace as if it were a venomous snake that had suddenly appeared in her bag. "I don't understand. This isn't mine. Someone must have put it in there." "Who?" Sergeant Williams asked. "The bag has been in your possession all evening." "I." Brixton's eyes darted wildly around the room, finally landing on me with pure hatred. "It was her. She did this. She must have slipped it in my bag. She's trying to frame me." Colin finally found his voice, shaking his head in disbelief. "Brixton, what is going on?" But his wife's control had completely snapped. The mask she'd worn for 8 years was gone, revealing the calculating predator underneath. "You want to know what's going on?" she snarled, her voice losing every trace of the sweetness she'd maintained all night. "I am sick of pretending to care about your pathetic mother. I am sick of waiting for her to pass away so we can get what should be ours. This house, her savings. She hoards everything while we struggle to pay our mortgage." Colin flinched. "We aren't struggling. I make plenty of money." "Plenty?" Brixton laughed, hysterically. "Your mother is sitting on an $800,000 property and $200,000 in savings. And I have to clip coupons for groceries. Do you know how humiliating that is? Do you know what it's like to pretend to love someone who is standing in the way of the life you deserve?" The truth poured out like poison from a broken bottle. Years of resentment, greed, and manipulation were laid bare in my dining room, with my grandson watching his mother reveal herself. "I planned this for months," she screamed, past the point of caring about the consequences. "I spread those rumors about her mental decline to make sure everyone would believe she was incompetent. All it took was one arrest for theft, and we could have filed for a conservatorship. I would have had legal control of her estate within 6 months." She glared at Tommy with pure disgust. "But my own son had to ruin it. My own flesh and blood chose his grandmother over his mother." Tommy was sobbing now. tears streaming down his face as the full weight of his mother's betrayal hit him. This wasn't just about a necklace. This was about a woman who saw her own family as nothing more than stepping stones to get what she wanted. Colin stood up slowly, his face completely devastated. "Take her," he whispered to the officers. "Just take her away." As Officer Chen read Brixton her rights, she threw one last look at me. The hatred in her eyes was pure and undiluted. "You think you won?" she hissed. "This isn't over. I'll find another way. I'll make you pay for this." And then she was gone, escorted out in handcuffs, under the watchful eyes of the neighbors gathered on the street. The woman who had tried to destroy my life was finally facing the consequences of her actions. But as I looked at my broken son and my deeply traumatized grandson, I realized some victories come at a devastating cost. The silence that settled over the house after Brixton's arrest was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It wasn't peace. It was emptiness, the kind of quiet that follows a massive storm. Colin sat slumped in his chair, his face buried in his hands, while Tommy curled up next to me on the sofa after the officers finished taking our initial statements. Sergeant Williams' questions had been gentle but thorough, uncovering details none of us wanted to face. How long had Brixton been targeting my estate? Had she dropped hints about my memory before tonight? Were there other incidents that could be misconstrued as mental decline? Every question revealed another layer of her manipulation. The missed doctor's appointment, the mixed-up dinner date, even her jabs about my silver hair. She'd been setting me up for months. But the most damning evidence came from Tommy. "Show the officers your sketchbook, sweetie," I said gently, stroking his hair. Tommy looked up, his dark eyes still red from crying. "Will this help them understand what really happened?" He nodded slowly, slipped off the sofa, and went upstairs to retrieve his overnight bag. When he returned, he held the sketchbook he'd clutched all evening, along with a tiny digital recorder that made my heart skip a beat. "Tommy," Sergeant Williams asked kindly, "what do you have there?" "I've been keeping track," Tommy whispered, sitting back down beside me, "of the things Mom did when Dad wasn't around. I wanted to remember them exactly. So I started drawing and writing them down." He opened the sketchbook, and I gasped. Page after page of detailed sketches showed Brixton in various rooms of my house. Brixton looking through my mail when she thought no one was watching. Brixton on the phone, looking angry while holding documents that looked like bills. Brixton searching through my jewel box. Only a deeply observant, worried child could have captured those moments with such precise detail. "She came here a lot when you weren't home, Grandma," Tommy whispered. "She had a spare key. She copied your papers and took photos of them with her phone." Officer Chen leaned forward. "How long has this been going on?" "Since last summer, maybe longer. She told me it was our secret. She said adults have to check on grandparents to make sure they're okay. But I wasn't supposed to tell anyone because it would hurt your feelings." My throat tightened as I realized how Brixton had manipulated my innocent grandson, making him an unwitting accomplice to her spying, while convincing him it was for my own good. This child had carried this heavy burden for months, torn between loyalty to his mother and love for his grandmother. "And the recorder?" Sergeant Williams asked gently. Tommy's small hand trembled as he held up the device. I started recording her phone calls when she thought I was playing video games. She talked to someone about money and about how to make Grandma look. I can't remember the word. Incompetent? I offered softly. He nodded. She said once Grandma was declared incompetent, Dad would have to take over, and then she could finally get the money to pay off her debts. Colin's head snapped up, his eyes wide. What debts? We don't have debts. Tommy looked at his father with that patient, sad look children give adults who refuse to see the obvious. Dad. Mom has a lot of credit cards you don't know about. She showed me the bills once when she was angry. She said it was because you didn't make enough money. How much? Colin's voice was hollow. Tommy shrugged. She said it was more than your car cost. And she kept buying things because she said we deserved a better life. More than his car. Colin drove a 3-year-old sedan worth about $28,000. If Brixton had accumulated that much high-interest credit card debt without his knowledge, it was no wonder she was so desperate to get her hands on my assets. Sergeant Williams was writing quickly. Son, can you play some of those recordings for us? Tommy nodded, his fingers finding the small buttons on the device. A moment later, Brixton's voice filled my living room, clear and undeniable. The old lady thinks she's so clever, living in that big house like a queen while we drown in debt. But I've got it sorted. Once she gets arrested for theft, Colin will have to face reality. She's obviously losing her mind, and someone needs to take control before she hurts herself or someone else. A pause, then a faint voice on the other end. Are you sure this will work? What if she doesn't have the necklace on her? Oh, she'll have it. I'll make sure of it. I'll slip it into her bag while she's downstairs playing host. The whole family will be there to witness her confusion when the police find it. Colin will finally see his precious mother needs to be put away. And then, we get the conservatorship, sell that ridiculous house, and use the money to pull ourselves out of this hole. She'll be safe in a nice facility, out of our hair. And we can finally live the life we deserve. The recording ended. We all stared at the tiny device in Tommy's hand. The casual cruelty in Brixton's voice was suffocating. She hadn't just planned to steal my money. She had planned to systematically dismantle my life and convince my own son it was for my own good. There's more, Tommy whispered. A lot more. She talked to that person almost every week. Officer Chen looked at his partner. We need to take these as evidence, all of it. The sketchbook, the recorder, everything. Of course, I said. Tommy, you did the right thing by keeping these records. You saved my life. Colin finally spoke, his voice cracked with emotion. Why didn't you tell me this? Tommy's lower lip trembled. I tried, Dad. Remember when I said Mom was acting weird? And when I asked if Grandma was really sick? But you always told me I was imagining things, that Mom was just worried because she loved Grandma. The look on Colin's face was heartbreaking. He had dismissed his own son's concerns, choosing to believe his manipulative wife over the child who was desperately trying to warn him. How many times had Tommy tried to speak up, only to be told he was wrong? I'm sorry, Colin choked out. I'm so sorry, Tommy. I should have listened. There's one more thing. Tommy said, looking at me hesitantly. Mom used to put things in your food when you weren't looking. Little white pills she crushed up. The blood drained from my face completely. What pills? I don't know. She kept them in her purse. But whenever you ate the food with the crushed pills, you'd get really tired and confused. She'd take photos of you acting like that and write things down. She was drugging me. Brixton had been systematically drugging me to manufacture evidence of my cognitive decline. No wonder I had felt so foggy and disoriented after our recent family dinners. No wonder I'd forgotten conversations or felt unusually exhausted. She was poisoning me and using the side effects as proof of my deteriorating mental state. Under the law, this was severe elder abuse and felony poisoning. Sergeant Williams looked incredibly grim. Mrs. Whitfield, have you noticed a pattern of feeling confused or forgetful? I thought back over the past few months, connecting the dots I'd never been able to see before. Usually after family dinners, or during the spring when she brought me meals after my fall. You had a fall? Officer Chen asked, on the front steps. I thought I just slipped, but I trailed off, a horrifying realization taking shape. Brixton was with me that day. She had come over to bring me soup. The picture was getting clearer by the second, and infinitely more terrifying. How many of my recent struggles could be traced back to Brixton's sabotage? The fall that had left me with a sprained wrist and bruised ribs hadn't been an accident at all. We need to get you to the hospital for a blood panel and toxicology screening immediately, Sergeant Williams said. If she's been drugging you regularly, there might still be traces in your system. Will this help convict her? Colin asked, a coldness in his voice I'd never heard before. Combined with the recordings and the theft charge, this is enough to put her away for a very long time, the sergeant said, seriously. Elder abuse, fraud, theft. If she intended to strip Mrs. Whitfield of her freedom, we could be looking at felony kidnapping charges as well. She's facing major time. Tommy tugged at my sleeve. Grandma, there's one more thing. What is it, sweetie? Mom has a folder hidden at home. In her closet, behind the shoeboxes. It's full of papers about nursing homes and places for people who can't take care of themselves. She's been visiting them and taking notes. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Brixton hadn't just planned to have me declared incompetent. She had already begun scouting facilities. Once she had control over me, she had already decided where she was going to lock me away. She showed me the booklets once, Tommy continued. She said, Grandma might need to live in a place with nurses someday, and we have to be ready to help her. But the places looked really sad, Grandma. The people in the pictures didn't look like they wanted to be there. I pulled Tommy closer, overwhelmed by the sheer scope of Brixton's betrayal. She had planned every detail of my destruction, from the drugs used to mimic dementia to the facility where she would deposit me. She had even begun desensitizing her own son to the idea that losing his grandmother was a natural, necessary transition. Colin stood up abruptly and walked to the window, his shoulders shaking with silent emotion. When he turned back to face us, tears were running down his cheeks. I let this happen, he said. I let her poison you, manipulate me, and traumatize my own son. What kind of man am I? You're human, Colin. I said gently. She spent 8 years perfecting her manipulation. She knew exactly how to use your love for both of us against you. But Tommy saw through it. A 12-year-old boy was braver and smarter than any of us. Tommy saw things clearly because he hasn't learned to doubt his instincts yet, Colin said bitterly. We adults force ourselves to ignore the red flags because we want to believe the best in the people we care about, even when they don't deserve it. Sergeant Williams closed his notepad and stood up. Mrs. Whitfield, we'll need you to come to the station tomorrow to make a formal statement. As for Tommy, we'll need parental consent and a child advocate present to interview him properly. I'll bring him, Colin said firmly, and I want to press charges of my own. For what she did to my son, for the fear and responsibility she forced him to carry. There have to be consequences for putting a child through that. As the officers prepared to leave, Sergeant Williams paused by the door. Mrs. Whitfield, you should know that your grandson saved your life tonight. If Brixton's plan had worked, if you had been arrested and declared incompetent. He didn't need to finish the sentence. We all knew where that path ended. A slow death in a locked facility, heavily medicated to ensure compliance, cut off from anyone who might speak for me. I would have spent the rest of my days in confusion and neglect, while Brixton enjoyed the fruits of her cruelty. But Tommy stopped her. My brave, observant, loyal grandson had seen right through 8 years of careful manipulation and found the courage to act when it mattered most. As the patrol car drove away with the evidence that would ensure Brixton faced justice, I sat in the living room with my son and grandson, trying to process the disaster we had just narrowly escaped. The woman we had welcomed into our family, the mother of my cherished grandson, had been systematically dismantling us from the inside out. And we, too busy trying to keep the peace, had almost let her get away with it. 3 days after her arrest, Brixton was released on bail. Her bail was set at $25,000, paid by her mother, who had somehow scraped the money together, most likely through a high-interest loan against her own modest home. When Sergeant Williams called to give me the news, it felt like a punch to the stomach. I had hoped for at least a few weeks of quiet before facing the inevitable court dates. She is legally barred from contacting you or coming within 500 feet of your property, the sergeant assured me, referencing the standard protection order. But Mrs. Whitfield, please be cautious. People facing serious charges can make desperate choices. I understood what he was leaving unsaid. Brixton had nothing left to lose. Her marriage was over, her reputation was ruined, and her future was in shambles. A desperate person is always the most dangerous. Colin and Tommy moved back into my house temporarily. Colin couldn't stand being in the home he'd shared with a woman he realized he never truly knew. Tommy was sleeping much better now, finally safe from his mother's constant surveillance, but Colin was a wreck. He barely ate, stared out the window for hours, and jumped every time the phone rang. I keep looking back at the warning signs I missed. Colin said one Thursday morning, watching me make breakfast. In just 3 days, he'd lost weight, and his clothes hung loosely on his frame. Remember when you had the flu and she insisted on doing your grocery shopping? or when she volunteered to organize your pillbox. I flipped a pancake, my hands steady, but my stomach turned at the realization. She was looking for opportunities to drug me, I said quietly, testing dosages, seeing what worked. And I thanked her for it. Colin's voice was thick with self-loathing, and I thanked her for slowly poisoning my own mother. Tommy appeared in the doorway, his hair messy from sleep, clutching his sketchbook. Ever since Monday night, he barely let it out of his sight. It had become his safety blanket. "Is Mom coming back?" he asked, a question he'd repeated every morning since she was taken away. "No, sweetie," I said firmly. "The law won't let her come near us again." "Good," he said simply, climbing into his usual chair. "I don't want her to hurt you anymore, Grandma." To hear a 12-year-old express relief at his mother's absence was heartbreaking, but there was no arguing with his logic. Brixton had hurt us all, but Tommy carried the unique burden of having seen her true nature long before anyone else. At 9:30 a.m., the phone rang, shattering the quiet of our breakfast. I glanced at the caller ID, and my blood froze. It was the landline number from Colin's house. "Don't answer it," Colin said quickly, but I picked up the receiver anyway. "Norma." Brixton's voice had changed. Stripped of all the sweet, fake warmth, it was cold, calculating, and vicious. "I think it's time we had a real talk." "You shouldn't be calling me," I said, my hand trembling slightly. "I'm calling from my own house. Technically, I'm calling for Colin, but you happened to answer." I could hear the sneer in her voice. "Besides, what are they going to do? Arrest me again? Thanks to you, I'm already looking at 10 years." Colin was frantically gesturing for me to hang up, but some instinct kept me on the line. I wanted to hear what she had to say now that the mask was completely shattered. "What do you want, Brixton? I want you to know you haven't won anything. You think you're so smart turning my own son against me and making me look like a monster. But let me tell you what's actually going to happen." Her voice grew louder, more unhinged. In the background, I could hear the sound of things being thrown and glass shattering. "I'm taking Tommy. My mother has friends out of state who don't ask questions. By the time Colin figures out what's happening, we'll be long gone. And you miserable old woman, will spend the rest of your life knowing you destroyed a boy's relationship with his mother." Tommy went pale. Crossing state lines with a child was a major federal offense. Colin snatched the phone from my hand. "Brixton, if you come anywhere near my son, I will personally make sure you regret it," he said, his voice dangerously low. "Your son," she laughed harshly. "He was never just your son, Colin. He was my insurance policy. My leverage to make sure I always have something to bargain with. And now you've forced my hand." The line went dead. Colin immediately dialed 911 while I pulled Tommy close, feeling him shake with fear. Through the kitchen window, I could see neighbors going about their typical Thursday routines. Mowing lawns, waiting for school buses. They had no idea a desperate woman was out there, plotting to tear what was left of our family apart. The police arrived at Colin's house within minutes, but they were too late. By the time they kicked in the door, Brixton was gone. The house had been ransacked, furniture overturned, and family photos smashed on the floor. In Tommy's room, clothes were scattered everywhere, indicating she'd packed in a hurry. But thank goodness Tommy was with us. That was all that mattered. We need to consider putting you all in protective custody, Sergeant Williams said when he arrived at my house an hour later. She's highly unstable and facing severe charges. People in her position feel like they have nothing left to lose. For how long? Colin asked. Until we find her. It could be days, or it could be weeks. I looked around my kitchen, the heart of this home, where I'd cooked thousands of meals and solved countless family problems. To leave all of this behind, to run and hide from Brixton instead of standing our ground, felt like giving up. No, I said firmly. This is my home. I'm not letting that woman run me out of it. Mrs. Whitfield, I understand how you feel, but you have to realize. I do realize, I interrupted, straightening my back. Do you know what it's like to have someone you welcomed into your family try to systematically destroy your mind? Take your freedom and plan to leave you in an institution? For 8 years, I made excuses for her behavior to keep the peace, telling myself that family unity was worth any sacrifice. But real family doesn't hurt you. Family doesn't treat you like an obstacle to clear away. Tommy slipped his hand into mine. Grandma is right, he said quietly. We shouldn't hide. Mom is the one who did bad things. Colin looked at his son with a mixture of pride and sorrow. When did you get so mature, buddy? I had to, Tommy said simply. Someone had to keep their eyes open. The weight of his words hung in the air. This child had been forced to grow up far too fast, carrying secrets that were much too heavy for his age. Yet, out of love, loyalty, and sheer bravery, he had done it anyway. We'll step up patrols in your neighborhood, Sergeant Williams promised, finally relenting. And we're actively tracking her down. But promise me you'll stay vigilant. Keep the doors locked, and call us the second you see anything unusual. After the police left, the three of us sat in the living room, adapting to our tense new reality. Brixton was out there, planning some kind of retaliation. She had already proven she was capable of anything. I keep trying to think back to the early days. Colin broke the heavy silence. When I first met her, she seemed so normal, so caring. She was a nurse, for heaven's sake. I thought that meant she had a natural instinct to take care of people. She was just really good at pretending, Tommy said matter-of-factly. But sometimes, when she thought no one was looking, her face would go cold. Really cold. Like when you wouldn't buy her something she wanted, or when Grandma talked about her own mother. She hated hearing about happy families. I recalled the brief, chilly expressions I'd caught on Brixton's face over the years. I'd always excused them as stress or exhaustion, never realizing it was the real, her slipping through the cracks of her mask. Do you think she ever loved any of us? Colin asked, his voice raw. Tommy answered with the painful honesty only a child could manage. I don't think she knows how to love. Night fell, and we fell into an uneasy routine. Colin and Tommy slept in the guest room, while I tried to rest in my own bed. But every creak of the old house and every rustle of the leaves outside had me sitting up, on high alert. Just before midnight, my phone buzzed. I'm watching the house. Brixton's voice hissed through the receiver. I can see Tommy's silhouette in the upstairs window. What a sweet boy. It would be such a shame if something happened to him. This time, I hung up instantly and called the police. But when the patrol cars searched the area, They found nothing. There was no sign of Brixton, and no evidence she had been near the property. She could be calling from anywhere, Officer Chen explained later. Technology makes it easy to spoof caller locations. She might not even be in the state. But I knew she was close. I could feel her circling like a predator, waiting for the right moment to strike. The woman who had spent 8 years learning our habits and weaknesses wasn't going to walk away easily. As I finally drifted off to sleep near dawn, I couldn't shake the feeling that our true trial was just beginning. 6 months later, we stood in the parking lot of the Connecticut courthouse. I watched as Brixton was led away in shackles. The judge had just sentenced her to 12 years in federal prison for elder abuse, fraud, grand theft, and stalking. Her bail had been revoked after her third violation of the protection order when she tried to approach Colin's new apartment. For the past 4 months, she'd been held in the county jail awaiting trial. The woman in the orange jumpsuit bore little resemblance to the polished, elegant person who had sat at my dining room table, plotting my downfall. Prison had stripped away her designer clothes, her perfect makeup, and her styled hair. All that was left was a harsh, bitter reality of sharp angles and barely concealed rage. As the transport van drove away, Tommy slipped his hand into mine. He was 13 now, taller and more confident. But he still carried his sketchbook everywhere. During the trial, his testimony had been devastating in its quiet honesty. Even the defense attorney seemed uncomfortable cross-examining a child who clearly understood his mother's cruelty. "Is it really over now, Grandma?" he asked. "Yes, sweetie. It's finally over." Colin wrapped arms around both of us. Their divorce had been finalized 3 months ago, and he was slowly rebuilding his life. He'd started therapy to process the guilt and trauma of years of psychological manipulation. Some days were harder than others, but he was healing. "Mom," he whispered, "I owe you an apology I don't think I can ever fully make up for. Colin, we've talked about this. You don't owe me anything. I do. I brought her into our lives. I chose her over you. Time and time again. I almost let her destroy you." I turned to face my son. He was a good man who had been manipulated by someone who specialized in exploiting trust and affection. "You loved someone who didn't deserve it. That doesn't make you a bad person, Colin. It just makes you human." And Tommy saw through it. A child noticed what we missed. "Tommy wasn't blinded by hope the way we were," I said. "Adults try to see the best in the people they care about. Children just trust their gut." We walked slowly toward our car, none of us in a hurry to leave the moment behind. The trial had been grueling, dragging up every painful detail of Brixton's manipulation and abuse. But it had also brought us closer, forcing us to face the truths we'd avoided for years. "Do you know what I keep thinking about?" Tommy said as we got into the car. "All those times when I said something felt wrong, and she told me I was making things up. She made me feel like I was crazy for seeing what I saw." "That's called gaslighting," Colin said. "It's a form of manipulation, and she did it to all of us." "But never again," I said firmly. "Never again." The drive home was quiet and peaceful, the first truly relaxed car ride we'd shared in months. The heavy weight that had hung over us since that terrible dinner had finally lifted. Tommy even laughed out loud at a joke on the radio, a sound so pure and happy it brought tears to my eyes. When we arrived back at my house, which was now our house, as Colin and Tommy had decided to stay, we found an elegant envelope waiting on the porch with my name on it. "What is it?" Colin asked, immediately alert. I opened it carefully and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was from Brixton's mother, Sarah, whom I'd only met a handful of times over the years. "Dear Norma, I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, but I had to write this before I lost my courage. I've spent the last 6 months trying to understand how my daughter became who she is, and I keep coming back to a painful conclusion. I failed her, and in doing so, I failed your family. I knew Brixton struggled with money. She came to me for help constantly, always with stories about how Colin didn't provide enough and how you were hoarding wealth that should be shared. I gave her money, made excuses for her spending, and enabled her sense of entitlement. I thought I was being a supportive mother, but I had no idea she was drugging you. I had no idea her manipulation and cruelty ran so deep. When the police told me what she had done and what she'd planned, I couldn't sleep for weeks. The woman they described wasn't the daughter I thought I raised. But perhaps that's because I've been making excuses for her bad behavior since she was a child. I want you to know that Tommy is an extraordinary boy." Watching him testify so bravely and clearly reminded me that even in the worst situations, good things can emerge. You and Colin raised him to be brave and honest, even when it meant standing up to his own mother. I am selling my home and donating the proceeds to organizations that help victims of elder abuse. It won't undo the damage Brixton caused, but perhaps it will prevent another family from experiencing the pain you've endured. I hope that one day you can find it in your heart to forgive an old woman who should have seen her daughter's true colors much sooner. With my deepest regrets and respect, Sarah Mitchell. I folded the letter carefully, looking at my son and grandson, who were watching me with concerned expressions. "What does it say?" Colin asked. I handed him the letter, watching his expression shift as he read. When he finished, he was silent for a long time. "She isn't responsible for what Brixton did," he said finally. "No, she isn't. But I understand why she feels that way. When someone you love hurts others, it's hard not to wonder if you could have stopped it." Tommy had been listening intently. "Do you think Brixton always knew she was being bad? Or did she convince herself she was doing the right thing?" It was an incredibly perceptive question, cutting right to the heart of human nature. I thought about it before answering. I think she started by convincing herself that what she wanted was fair. She felt life hadn't given her what she deserved, so she felt we owed her. But at some point, she crossed a line. She went from wanting things to being willing to destroy people to get them. Once you cross that line, it's very hard to go back. Some people realize they've gone too far and try to make amends. But Brixton was too proud and too angry to admit she was wrong. So she kept building on her lies until they became her reality. We spent the evening quietly. We ordered pizza and watched old movies on TV. These normal, simple family activities felt like the ultimate luxury after months of hearings, police questions, and constantly looking over our shoulders. Around 10 o'clock, Tommy pulled out his sketchbook to show us some new drawings. Instead of pages filled with detailed records of Brixton's cruelty, there were warm, happy scenes. The three of us having breakfast, Colin teaching him chess, and me working in the rose garden while they played catch in the yard. I don't want to remember the bad things anymore, he said. I want to fill my book with good memories. That sounds like a wonderful plan, I said, hugging him tightly. After Tommy went to bed, Colin and I sat on the front porch, listening to the quiet sounds of the neighborhood. It was a habit we'd picked up during the trial. These quiet chats helped us process everything we had been through. Do you think we'll ever feel completely safe again? He asked. I think we'll feel different. Maybe more cautious, but also stronger. We survived, and we overcame something that almost destroyed us. And we did it by standing together. Tommy saved us all, Colin said softly. If he hadn't found the courage to speak up, but he did. Because despite everything Brixton put him through, he never stopped believing that the truth matters more than keeping a fake peace. A year later, I was working in the rose garden when I heard the familiar sound of Tommy's bike pulling into the driveway. He was 14 now, nearly as tall as his father, and growing more like his gentle grandfather every day. The sketchbook had been replaced by a camera, and his teachers were already amazed by his natural talent for photography. How was school? I asked as he walked over. Great. I developed some photos in the darkroom. He pulled out a set of black and white prints. Through his patient eyes, ordinary scenes of daily life had been transformed into art. Mr. Henderson thinks I should enter these in the state competition. I looked closely at the photos. Through Tommy's lens, I saw our neighborhood, our home, and our daily routine. There was beauty in every frame and hope in every composition. This was how he chose to see the world now. Not as a dangerous place full of hidden threats, but as a canvas of light and possibility. These are beautiful, Tommy. You have a real gift. I got it from you, he said, sitting beside me on the garden bench. The observing part, I mean. You taught me to pay attention to what's actually happening, not just what people want you to see. Colin walked out of the house. He'd just gotten home from work, looking truly happy for the first time in years. He'd been promoted to senior partner at his firm and had started dating a kind woman named Lisa, who understood that being with Colin meant welcoming a teenage son and a grandmother who would always be the heart of this family. Great timing, I said, as he joined us. Tommy was just showing me his latest photos. Colin examined the prints with the careful eye of an architect. These are incredible, son. You have an artist's eye. Want to see my favorite? Tommy asked, pulling out a photo I hadn't noticed before. It was a shot of our kitchen table during one of our Sunday morning breakfasts. The sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating 3 coffee cups, a plate of homemade biscuits, and our hands reaching for the jam and butter. It was simple, ordinary, and absolutely beautiful. That's us, Tommy said, though it needed no explanation. That's our real family. I looked at the remarkable young man beside me, the boy whose courage and honesty had saved us all, and my heart swelled with gratitude. Brixton had tried to destroy our family, but instead, she had shown us what we truly meant to one another. We had lost our easy, naive sense of security, but we had gained something far more valuable. A deep certainty that as long as we faced things together, we could weather any storm. In the end, that truth was worth more than all of Brixton's lies. The woman who tried to style my life had lost everything, and we had gained an unshakable strength. The knowledge that when love is real, it is always stronger than manipulation, and the truth, even when painful, is always worth fighting for. As the three of us sat in the garden, surrounded by flowers that had survived the winter and bloomed brighter with each passing year, I realized that some victories aren't about defeating your enemy. Sometimes, victory is simply refusing to let bitterness take root in your heart. And as I watched my son and grandson laughing together in the golden afternoon light, I knew that was the greatest victory of all.